I've never met Keir Starmer, I'm delighted to say, but we have, as they say, previous. At the time of my cancellation back in 2020, Starmer was the only person in public life who wanted poor little Darren Grimes and me to be charged under the Section 6 of the Public Order Act, which I think carries mandatory imprisonment and up to 6 years. But is the measure of the man, the measure of his nastiness, the measure of his desire for vengeance, the measure of his hatred of free speech and his general hatred of freedom. So, Starmer and
I'm actually shocked at the level of authoritarian nastiness that Keir Starmer has displayed in the past. It is clear he has spent his career as a far-left human rights lawyer who does not believe in free speech. He believes in shutting down those he disagrees with. He is obsessed with rules and making sure no one defies him. It turns out he refused to condemn a police investigation into an interview between Darren Grimes and David Starkey, in which David Starkey said this. Now, you can disagree with whether transatlantic slavery was genocide or not. You can call out Starkey's crude comments as offensive and stupid. But a police investigation into a few unpleasant words is absolutely outrageous. It was bad enough Starkey lost all his positions overnight. No hearing, no chance to explain himself, nothing. Just cancelled by a university he had given a lifetime of service to. It turns out after the interview, Darren Grimes was interviewed under police caution, and according to David Starkey, Keir Starmer was the only one who agreed with that and was even trying to have Starkey arrested and thrown in prison. Starmer pretty much admits it here in this LBC interview.
Other politicians and others are concerned that the police are getting involved in a conversation or an interview between a Brexit blogger, Darren Grimes, in which he spoke with historian David Starkey. Mr. Starkey made various comments about black people and slavery, which I'm sure nobody would support. But should it be the subject of a police investigation for the particular blogger who held that conversation? Indeed, in your previous posts, you'd have a view on this.
I think it does sometimes have to involve the police, unfortunately. When I was Director of Public Prosecutions, there was a lot of focus on whether what people say on social media should be policed or not. And I think there's got to be a level of tolerance, of course. But there is a point, there's a line that can be crossed, and it's very important that when it is crossed that there is involvement, in some cases, prosecutions.
And as Starkey says, that tells you how intolerant, vindictive and nasty Starmer is. It should be noted this incident was in 2020 and that was before the Labour government. So we know the police were already political back then. But that has become even worse under this Starmer government. It makes you fear for the future. How many more political prisoners are we going to see while he is in power? And how much more extreme will he become as the years pass by if he remains in power? This is David Starkey explaining what happened and exactly what he thinks of Keir Starmer.
They've announced their intention to scrap the Higher Education Free Speech Bill for universities. We know that they have some other plans for curtailing free speech. What do you make of that side of things? What does it mean for civil liberties? And
I think it's entirely predictable. I mean, let me take my own case. You will remember I had an incident where the tongue slipped, as it tends to when you say too many things as I do. There were two stages in that business. There was the initial hysterical reaction of the 30th of June, the 1st of July 2020, and cancellation and whatever. And then a few months later in October, there was a particularly insane policeman. And he decided, myself and poor little Darren Grimes, had committed an offence under under Section 6, I think it is, of the Public Order Act, which carries sentences of up to 6 years. Wow. Now, even the Times, that was not very sympathetic, wrote a third leader saying, this is mad. Grimes should hold his head in shame and Starkey should retire, and whatever. And the one public figure supported that charge. Who was it?
I can't remember.
Sir Keir Starmer,
Of course it was.
ex-DPP. And remember, this is the most terrifying thing about them. This is where they are a real, genuine and urgent and dangerous threat.
A lot of people talk about Keir Starmer as being a moderate. They look at the Labour manifesto and say that it was very thin, very light on promises. But you've argued that actually Labour's programme is a lot more substantial and perhaps a lot more worrying than a lot of people have been led to believe.
You asked me two questions, one about Starmer, the other about the programme. Let's begin with Starmer. Starmer, as the Baldwin biography makes clear, has fundamental and indeed fundamentalist beliefs. He is a believer in the supremacy of law. That doesn't actually mean the supremacy of law. It means the supremacy of lawyers, of people like him. He believes that basically human society should be constructed according to rules made by people like him, which are enforced by people like him, and prevent anybody else who is not like him from having a say in anything. That's where we are.
If you think of Rosie Duffield's magnificent letter, she points out that this is a man who is now Prime Minister of the country who had no political experience. He is also not simply a lawyer. Everybody said to me, how on earth can this man be a QC? How can he be so, well, A, dumb, and B, how can he be so bad at public speaking? You know, from nasal whine. Well, I suppose he can't help that he comes from Reigate, but that's or indeed, my father was a toolmaker too, but I did something about it, I suppose. But what has gone wrong with Starmer is that A, he's not very clever. It's really important we recognise this. He gets 2 B's and a C when he is a scholarship boy at a selective school. That is very poor. Secondly, he practiced a very particular form of law, which is human rights law, in which you never plead before a jury. In fact, you never probably plead before a judge. Everything is done with written pleadings, which are merely these abstract theoretical statements. So he is a man who has lived the whole of his life in a formal structure of arbitrary rules.